The invitation arrived by post. Dave, who comes home for lunch most days, was the first to see it. It was addressed in his daughter's handwriting. And the first thing I thought, he said, before I opened it, was wedding. I thought they were getting married. The envelope certainly stood out from the bills. Did it occur to you that they might have mentioned something, said Morley? I mean, before they sent us an invitation? She is our daughter. When he did open it, what he found was a piece of torn paper with a photographic negative stapled to it. There's nothing written on the paper, but if you held the negative up to the light, there was a message. It was an invitation, though not to a wedding, to a gallery, an invitation to an opening. Tommy, Stephanie's boyfriend Tommy, was having his first big show. It's very impressive, said Morley. Crushed, said Dave. That was what it was called. The exhibition, Crushed. I don't know, said Dave. It sounds weird to me. The opening was scheduled for a Monday evening. It's a bit of a haul to the gallery, maybe 2.5 hours door to door. But they were going to go, of course. Do we have to? Said Dave. Morley booked them into a room at the Winsome Inn, which was the place they stayed the weekend they dropped Steph off, her first year away. How many years ago was that? They arrived in the afternoon and had lunch at a table by the water. The pond so close you could almost touch it. The waterfall just out of sight. Same table, said Dave. I'm not sure, said Morley. Absolutely, said Dave, reaching for the ketchup. And then he said, so what's been crushing him? What do you think? The modern world? The media? The Maple Leafs? A few hours later, they were standing in front of a blown-up, larger-than-life photograph of a flattened snake in a gallery full of close-up, poster-sized portraits of dead animals that had been run over by cars. Snakes crushed by cars. Frogs crushed by cars. A turtle crushed by a car. I don't get it, said Dave. And then, doesn't this worry you? This is the man our daughter could be marrying. Morley said, no one's mentioned anything about marriage. Marriage is not on the table as far as I know. Dave said, well, they might as well be living together. Morley said, actually, they are. Exactly, said Dave. Our daughter is living with a man who takes pictures of roadkill. First off, that's not normal. Second off, I have no idea what these pictures mean or what I'm supposed to think of them. And third off, what do you mean they're living together? I thought he had his own place. And then he drifted off, got a glass of wine and wandered around the room chatting to the few people he knew and to the others he didn't, keeping his eye on his daughter and her boyfriend as he circled, trying his best to steer clear of them and the conversation he didn't want to have about the show. When the gallery owner stood on a chair by the front and tapped his glass, Dave joined everyone else, standing in a circle and nodding during the speeches about existential ambiguity and adjacent polarity and didactic surrealism and reverential reductionism. Someone else stood up, a professor from the university, and proposed a toast, and Dave raised his glass. When there was applause, he clapped. He tried his best to follow along, though nothing anyone was saying made any sense to him. When the speeches were over, Morley appeared to decide. Come here, she said. Have you seen this one? She steered him to a picture of a giant cedar waxwing. The bird, almost as big as a child, had been shot against a blue, out-of-focus background. Its eyes closed, its head bowed. Looked more like a monk inviting him to prayer than a bird who had flown into a car. Morley said, "It's beautiful." Dave said, "Yeah, but what does it mean?" Then he said, "It makes me feel sad." Then he said, "My father would have hated these." Charlie, who would pull his truck to the side of the road whenever he came across anything that had been run over. Then he'd carry whatever it was into the bushes. Charlie, who told them that they shouldn't let dead animals lie there in the road where they'd get run over again and again. "There's no dignity in that," said Charlie. Back then it was embarrassing. Now it seemed to make sense. Of course, it was easier to stop to administer to roadkill if you lived in the Narrows back in the day. Not so easy now, not the way people drove these days. When the show ended, they all went back to the inn to have dinner together for the second time in their lives. Tommy and Stephanie, Tommy's parents, and Dave and Morley. And more fine things were said. Tommy's mother said how proud she was. Morley said how the pictures reminded her of her childhood. "When I was a kid," she said, "we used to pick up dead things all the time." Stephanie said her favorite was the waxwing that Morley had shown Dave. No one said anything profound. It wasn't like the speeches at the gallery. Until Tommy's father stood up and proposed a toast, stealing liberally from the gallery owner's speech as he did it, which made Dave, who hadn't said anything, feel a bit better. Tommy's father, a university professor, clearly didn't have any more of a clue about his son's work than Dave did. When dinner was over, they said their goodbyes. Tommy's parents were going back to the city. Dave and Morley upstairs. But a half hour later, to his astonishment, Dave found himself in Tommy's car rather than in his hotel room, alone with Tommy. It was Stephanie's idea. "Just drive along the ridge," she said. "Just go out and back. Who knows? Maybe you'll find something." It was about a mile to the top of the ridge. The stars pin-pricking the dark black sky. The road in front of them, starless and blacker. "Mostly at night," said Tommy, "you find owls. They fly low, they get hit." It was awkward. First, they had never been alone in a car before, the two of them. The second, there they were, alone in the car. And third, worst of all, they were driving under the intimate cover of darkness, under the intimidating influence of art. Tommy had the radio on, but softly, country and western. You really couldn't hear it. And they drove, and when they got to the top, they came to a T-junction. And Tommy turned left, so the valley was below them on their left and the forest to their right. They'd been going maybe 20 minutes along the ridge road, and the forest had gradually given away to the fields and woodlots when Tommy braked. There were no other cars around. "What?" said Dave. Tommy flicked on the high beams and backed up. Then he jockeyed around a bit until the headlights caught the shadow. "A raccoon?" said Dave, leaning forward. "Or is it a dog?" "It's a fox," said Tommy. "I think you're right," said Dave, who was reaching for the door. Tommy said, "Wait." Tommy said, "Before you get out, you want to be sure there's nothing around. Coyotes or something. It's like a mafia thing to stop your car in the middle of nowhere to check out a body." As they walked toward the fox, Dave could feel his heart pounding. In a weird way, it was exhilarating. There was a light and a light stand in the trunk of the car. Tommy went and got it, and he set up the light, and then he crouched beside the fox. Dave didn't want to disturb him, so he went back and leaned against the hood of the car and watched him at work. Each time he took a shot, the light flashed with a soft woof. Each time the light went off, the night seemed blacker. When he finished, they both stood by the car. I always wonder, said Tommy, looking around, if there's a mate somewhere watching, or babies. I always wonder how it all went down. Dave looked into the darkness surrounding them. And then Tommy threw the light into the trunk and closed it. Tommy said, I know some of the pictures are beautiful in some weird way. And I like that. I have an appreciation of that. But mostly I just feel sad when I see them. Mostly they don't feel beautiful to me. Dave said, that's how they made me feel. Then Tommy said, my grandfather died a few years ago. I remember, said Dave. That's when I started doing this, said Tommy. Like poetry, you can find beauty in the most unexpected places. In a snowy wood and between the folded petals of a rose, yes, of course. But in sorrow as well as happiness. In death as well as life. You buy a dictionary in a second-hand bookstore, and somewhere halfway between the beginning and the end, waiting for you to turn the page, there is a flower pressed between the words. Sometimes poetry's hidden. And sometimes it's lying on the side of the road in full view. I don't think it's poetic, said Tommy. I don't think that at all. Dave said, all those people tonight thought so. All those people who bought prints and said all those things, that's got to mean something. They were back in the car now. They were on their way home. Tommy said, all that stuff tonight, all those things they said at the gallery, I didn't understand half that stuff. Dave almost clapped his hands, almost whooped. He almost said, I didn't either. But he didn't say that. He didn't say anything. Tommy was staring intensely into the night. Tommy hadn't finished. I'll tell you what I think, said Tommy. I think it means that beauty trumps morality. That's the way it is. That's the way it's always been. Don't think it should be like that, but that's the way it is. It's the way of the world. Then he said, maybe it'd be better if everyone came to my show and didn't like it and left. Someone once said that you'll never find a better place in the world for a difficult conversation than in a dark car. You don't have to look at the other person. And you both know when the trip ends, the conversation will too. Dave closed his eyes. Dave said, you'd have to be a special kind of person to go to your show and not get it. It wasn't a complete lie. He just needed some time and encouragement to get there. Dave said, here's what I think. I think there's a collision happening between civilization and the natural world. And I think you are the witness. Tommy said, I don't like it that animals are getting killed by cars. And then he said, sometimes I'll find a little bird, like the one of the waxwing. Did you see that one? He looked like he was praying, his head bowed and his eyes shut, and that slash of red blood on his head. In some messed up way, that's one of the most beautiful things I've ever seen. But I don't have a clue why. That's the thing. I feel these big feelings, and I don't understand why. They were almost back at the inn. As they turned between the stone gates, Dave felt a weight had lifted off his shoulders. There was no great big mystery, except for the great big mystery. We live, and then we die. What did John Paul Richter say? We all have exactly 2.5 minutes to live. One for smiling, and one for sighing, and a half a one to love. For it's in the middle of that minute, the loving one, that we die. And what we want more than anything, said Dave, between the living and the dying, is for someone to take notice. For someone to say, it matters that we're here. You think that's what I'm doing, said Tommy? Saying it matters? Maybe, said Dave. Mostly, said Tommy, what I think I'm saying is that I wish people would drive slower. And also that my grandfather was still here. I miss him. Dave was smiling as he was getting out of the car. Thanks for taking me out, he said. I loved seeing you at work. And I love your work. It's true, we did. Like I said, it just took him a while to get there. When he came into their room, Morley was still awake, sitting on the bed with a magazine in her hands. When he came in, she put it down and she drew up her knees and put her arms around her knees, and she said, "How'd it go?" Dave said, "We found a fox. He took pictures, and you know what he did when he was finished? When he was finished, he carried the fox to the side of the road and covered it with some brush, just like my father would have done." Did you believe that? He was about to reassure her that their daughter wasn't involved with an axe murderer. But he looked at her smile and realized he didn't have to say that. She had already read Tommy's pictures the way they were intended. As usual, she was way ahead of him. Instead of saying any of that, he said the thing about carrying the fox off the road, and then he just shrugged, thinking as he looked at his wife and thought of his daughter and, yes, his daughter's boyfriend and the night that had just passed, all of it, that he was a lucky man.